This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your headlines. At a huge military parade in Moscow's Red Square, President Vladimir Putin says the war in Ukraine was necessary and that Russia was provoked by the West. President Zelensky rebuts Putin's reading of history, saying in his own speech that the Russian president was repeating the horrific crimes of Hitler's regime. Ukraine's defense ministry says Russian forces are conducting storming operations on the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, backed by tanks and artillery fire, as Ukrainian defenders remain trapped inside. And as a year of talks about the future of Europe comes to an end, is the EU ready to make meaningful reforms? I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. President Vladimir Putin says Russian soldiers in Ukraine are fighting for the same thing that their grandfathers fought for in World War II, as the country holds Victory Day celebrations. Marking the anniversary of the German surrender to the Soviet Union, Russia's leader used the platform to address the nation about the war in Ukraine. Putin rallied the troops before the annual military parade in the capital, saying they were fighting to protect their homeland. He also justified the war by saying NATO left Russia no other option.
These days you are fighting for our children in the Donbass, for the security of our motherland, Russia. Despite international disagreements, Russia has always advocated the creation of a system of equal and indivisible security, which is vital to the entire international community. The NATO countries did not want to hear us, which means that in fact they had completely different plans.
Well, let's get some analysis now about what all of this means with our correspondent, Galina Polanskaya. Galina, good to see you. I think it's fair to say that that was a highly anticipated speech from Vladimir Putin. Many people were looking to see whether it contained clues about his war strategy, about where he goes from here. But perhaps what was more notable was what he didn't speak about, right?
Exactly, Helena. Not a clue on the strategy, on Russia's strategy in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin did not even pronounce, not a single one, the word Ukraine at his speech while addressing the military parade on the Red Square, even though he drew many parallels between what the Russian forces are doing right now and the Great Patriotic War. That's how the Second World War is called in Russia. There was no major political announcements, not a single announcement of some achievement. There were reports that said that Vladimir Putin could declare today officially war on Ukraine or announce some partial mobilization, but this did not happen as well. Vladimir Putin repeated once again what we have heard before. He accused the US and NATO and stressed that Russia had no other choice, that it had to defend itself. That is the message he surely wants the country to learn by heart. He also spoke about those who died and promised that the state will take care of their families and children, but he did not speak about any change of the strategy, about any roadmap. We did not hear any single word about this, Helena.
And Galina, anybody tuning in to that parade at home on their television, I mean, they might have got quite a surprise with an anti-war message, which was actually shown on some TV sets. Do we know how that came about?
Yes, some Russian viewers who switched on their TV sets today to watch the parade were quite surprised because the menu was actually hacked, according to the Interfax agency, and they saw, instead of the announcement of the parade or the titles, they saw some anti-war slogans such as TV and the authorities are lying and no to war, and some agencies report that also satellite televisions were hacked. But there were also, Helena, people who went on the streets across the whole country and they wanted to send their messages, and most of them were detained very briefly. One of them was a woman in Korolov. It's a city not far from Moscow. She took part in this march, the Immortal Regiment march. It's when people are going in the streets with the photos of their relatives who took part in the Second World War. So she was among them, and she had a photo of her relative in her hands, and she wrote under this photo, "Grandfathers did not want this to be repeated. Peace to the world. He fought for peace." And apparently she was detained very, very quickly and is still at the police station.
All right, our correspondent Galina Polinskaya there bringing us the latest. Galina, good to talk to you. Thanks for that. Ukraine's President Zelensky, meanwhile, used Victory Day commemorations to call out Moscow, saying that it is now acting like Nazi Germany. He compared Vladimir Putin to Adolf Hitler and said Ukraine would eventually defeat Russia in the war.
On February the 24th, Russia launched an offensive, treading on the same rake every occupier who comes to our land treads on. We have been through different wars, but they all had the same end. Our land was sown with bullets and shells, but no enemy was able to take root here.
Well, in Odessa, in southern Ukraine, is our international correspondent, Annalise Borges. We can bring her in now. Good to see you there, Annalise. Now, that message from President Zelensky was released shortly before we heard from Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it seemed that it was very much an attempt to try and preempt the narrative that the Russian president put forward.
Absolutely. Volodymyr Zelensky chose a dramatic backdrop to deliver a dramatic message, walking through the streets of Borodyanka, one of the hardest hit suburbs of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. He spoke about the return of evil to this country. He said that slogan that we all heard so often growing up across Europe, never again, that never again only lasted 77 years for Ukrainians, that here we are witnessing some of the same atrocities that Europe witnessed back during World War II. He accused Russia for committing Nazi-style atrocities across his country. And of course, the sad irony could not be missed. The fact that Russia said that one of its objectives with this military operation here in Ukraine was to denazify this country. The Ukrainian president also appealed to European nations by likening some of the attacks that happened across European towns and cities in the UK, in France, in the Netherlands, to some of the bombings that are happening right now across Ukraine in urban areas. He was also very moved at times in that video and spoke with determination, saying that this is a crucial time for his country and for Europe. It was a very interesting recording. It was a very interesting deliver, of course, a black and white recording saying that life here now is very much black and white, is very much pale, is dark. Volodymyr Zelensky, who again accused Russia repeatedly of repeating some of the worst atrocities that this continent has seen.
And Annalise, what is the situation right now where you are in the south? Because I understand that the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, has also been visiting the city of Odessa.
Indeed, the president of the European Council made a surprise visit to Odessa. He met the Ukrainian prime minister, but also the Odessa mayor. He was here on a tour of the city. He was given a tour of the city. He got to see some of the infrastructure and the monuments that are barricaded. During one of his meetings, they had to actually call off talks and seek shelter because of the threat of bombings. There were reports of bombings and strikes happening in the outskirts of the city during that visit. Charles Michel said that he was here with one message only, to say that Europe, the European Union, stands with Ukraine, that this country is not alone. They were joined in the talks by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who called in and thanked Charles Michel for showing up here in such a symbolic moment for this country and for Europe. Everybody here, Elena, understood the symbolism of this time, and actually authorities across this country are very much on high alert. There's a curfew in Odessa right now and across the south of the country because many of the authorities here were fearing that Russia would step up its attacks.
All right, Annalise Borges in the southern city of Odessa in Ukraine. As ever, Annalise, good to talk to you. Thank you. Ukraine's defence ministry has accused Russia of trying to storm the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged port city of Mariupol. Kyiv says that Russian troops backed by tanks and artillery are looking to breach the site where remaining Ukrainian resistance fighters are holed up. Reports suggest that the assault began after a UN convoy had left the Donetsk region, but authorities insist that no breakthrough was made. Russia has previously denied accusations that it has tried to attack the plant where civilians had been seeking refuge in a network of tunnels below. Well, here in the studio with me, closely monitoring developments across Ukraine, is our correspondent Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, good to see you. That warning from Ukraine's defence ministry that Azovstal once again facing the prospect of attack, a last stand potentially there. What more can you tell us about the situation?
Well, Azovstal Steelworks has been under attack throughout, all day, all night, over the past couple of weeks. Now, the question here is the storming of Azovstal. The bombardment never stopped, actually, except for those very rare moments for the humanitarian corridors. And we now know that all of the women and children and elderly are being evacuated from Azovstal, and only Ukrainian defenders are there. The storming restarted this afternoon, according to the reports by Ukraine's defense ministry. Indeed, what we do know is that there are up to 600 Ukrainian servicemen who require medical assistance who are at Azovstal. This is 600 out of around, for different estimates, but there are up to 2,000 Ukrainian defenders there at Azovstal. Around 600 of them might need and require very, very urgent medical help. And this is something they do not have, because they don't have much water, they don't have much food left, and they do not have medical supplies. And this is how the situation is there, and it's getting only worse and worse, because people who are wounded there, those defenders, they cannot just get the assistance that they need. Now, when the civilians and women, children have been evacuated, now the pressure is back again on Kyiv, on Zelensky, on how to try to help those defenders. There are two ways of doing that. The first way is diplomatic way, and this is something that we have been seeing him doing. He's trying to negotiate, trying to ask for help from Western leaders. They keep insisting on this procedure of extraction by the third-party country. And the second way of doing that is with fighting, but for that Ukraine does need still delivery of some heavy weaponry.
As you say, Sasha, 600 potentially military personnel there injured. It is just a huge number. And meanwhile, in the east of the country, yesterday, of course, we saw that attack in Luhansk. Around 60 people killed in an area that is a designated school, so it's a sort of a shelter area. One of the largest, I would say, confirmed attacks in the east of the country, right?
That's it. 60 people who were hiding there, 60 people who were seeking shelter. We're talking about civilians who were seeking shelter in the Luhansk region. Again, Luhansk and Donetsk, of course, there's heavy fighting all across the front line there. This is over 450 kilometers of the front line. These people were civilians. They were just seeking shelter. But this is not the first time, unfortunately. We have seen this happening. Russian forces have struck fleeing or sheltering civilians on numerous occasions in Ukraine since the invasion started. We've seen schools, nurseries, and hospitals being targeted. This has already been confirmed by the United Nations. We have had some reaction, of course, from the West, from the UN as well, saying that this is yet another stark reminder of the cruelty of this war. Now, when it comes to some of those cases, we all do remember the bombardment of the theater in Mariupol, the theater where people were sheltering, up to 1,000 people were sheltering there, with a huge writing on the ground on both sides that there were children and this was just shelter. We do not know confirmed how many people died in that attack. We have heard from the AP investigation there could be up to 600 people who died there in the theater in Mariupol. But yet again, there is no access to Mariupol. There is no possibility for anybody to get in and to actually confirm that information and to investigate the case.
As you say, Sasha, the targeting of civilian infrastructure is deeply concerning. Sasha Vakulina reporting there as ever. Sasha, thank you. Welcome back. Good to have you with us. Now, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and French President Emmanuel Macron have backed the possibility of changing EU treaties. Now, on Europe Day, von der Leyen outlined plans to use supermajority voting in areas that currently require unanimous agreement and to extend areas where Brussels can legislate. Macron argued for the creation of a European political community to allow states who struggle to join the bloc to still remain close to the Union.
Cette organisation européenne nouvelle,
this new European organisation would allow democratic European nations adhering to our core values to find a new space for political cooperation. cooperation in security, energy, transport, infrastructure investment, and in the movement of people, in particular our youth.
All right, let's take this straight now to Strasbourg, where we can bring in our correspondent, Maeve McMahon. Maeve, the conference on the future of Europe is wrapping up essentially what is a year's worth of work. Concretely, what can we expect to come out of all of these discussions?
Good evening, Helena. Well, nothing changes overnight. EU citizens will not be just allowed into EU summits in Brussels, which, of course, as you know, take always behind closed doors. And it will be very much business as usual, despite the last year and a half's attempts and, of course, the big efforts made. But what we heard today from Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, is that she will be making a huge effort to prioritise those 49 points that were made by over 800 citizens who've been working together for over a year and a half on those various topics. She said she'll be alluding to them in her State of the Union speech in September. Because, of course, as you mentioned yourself, what this whole Future of Europe conference has brought up is the topic of treaty change, the topic of taking away unanimity, which of course is slowing down the progress that can be made in the bloc and the reason why we see so much division all the time. Now, one man who's been the face, if you like, of the Future of Europe conference is Guy Verhofstadt. He's a Belgian MEP, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, an avid federalist and never afraid to show that. And today I asked him what it felt like to be celebrating Europe Day with war on European soil.
A big difference. In Moscow there is a parade with, I should say, a delirium of weapons, tanks and so on. And by contrast here in Strasbourg, European leaders together with citizens are talking about the future of their common peace project, who came out of the Second World War. And I think this illustrated the big difference between an autocracy at the one hand and a democracy as ours.
So Guy Verhofstadt there speaking to you earlier, and of course many MEPs and even European leaders gathered there in Strasbourg today. And whilst they are all there together, what they haven't been able to yet agree on is a fresh round of sanctions against Russia, have they?
No, they haven't, Helena. In fact, that's been under discussion for weeks now. And last weekend, ambassadors from all around the bloc gave up their weekends, both Saturday and Sunday, to lock themselves behind doors to discuss them. But they still haven't reached an agreement. Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary still very much against this sixth package of sanctions, this oil embargo, the way it would impact them and their economy. But what we're seeing tonight is Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, actually travelling to Budapest. She's going to visit Viktor Orban tonight to speak face to face with him, to ask him perhaps in private to dial down the rhetoric, because you might have seen last Friday speaking to Kazakh radio, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister, compared that sanction package to an atomic bomb, what would be atomic bomb for the economy of his country. So we're seeing tonight Ursula von der Leyen really going over there to use her power and see can she have some sort of impact on Viktor Orban to tone down that rhetoric and come in line with the rest.
All right, Maeve, one thing I do have to ask you about before we go is, of course, the results of the parliamentary elections in Northern Ireland, which we saw over the weekend. And now as parliamentarians try and get Stormont up and running again for Brussels, essentially, that means that the Northern Ireland Protocol is up for discussion once again.
Yeah, and I spoke to many people about that here today. In fact, and a close advisor to Maris Sefcovic, the European Commissioner in charge of that dossier, and he said it will not be up for discussion. Quote, he said, the EU has shown flexibility. It's up to discussing again around the table. But he said, the UK government must be honest about the deal they signed up to. And other politicians and MEPs that I asked about that today, the Northern Ireland Protocol, told me that today is not about Brexit, it's not about Europe's past, it's about Europe's future without the UK. They told me that was not their decision, that was that of the UK. But now it's all about the future of Europe and enlargement, that after many years of enlargement fatigue, now what many people here are talking about are potential enlargement. And we heard as well Ursula von der Leyen today say that she spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine this morning. He handed her a 5,000-page dossier document with all the information she had asked him of regarding the potential membership of Ukraine towards the European Union.
All right, Maeve McMahon in Strasbourg. As ever, good to talk to you. Thanks, Maeve. Now, Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned following weeks of anti-government protests. Demonstrators have called for both Rajapaksa and his brother, the country's president, to step down amid the worst economic crisis in decades. On Monday, violent clashes broke out between protesters and government supporters in the capital, Colombo, where the army has been deployed. The homes of other politicians across the country have also been attacked and set on fire. Welcome back. Good to have you with us. Fans of the Eurovision Song Contest will be happy to hear that the competition returns to our screens this week. Italy is hosting the event for the first time in 31 years, and bookmakers have predicted that Ukraine will win the contest, as Richard Cady now reports.
It's time for the next delegation.
Contestants for the 66th edition of the Eurovision Song Contest gathered in Turin on Sunday for the opening ceremony. All the artists participating in this year's competition were presented to the press and the public. And there was a particularly warm reception for the strong favourites, Ukraine.
Since we were given a special authorization to temporarily come to Turin, we feel it's our responsibility to be as useful to our country as we can, to represent our country in the best way in this international area. It's why we are here and doing our best.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, this year has seen an unprecedented wave of support for Ukraine's entry. The Kalish Orchestra's song Stefania has already clocked up 5 million views of their video on YouTube, even securing support from the other contestants.
We want to ask you to not lose interest and bring awareness to the war still going on. We are big supporters of Ukraine, and we are completely rooting for them in every way.
I think it's so important to right now show that unity, because that's during these difficult times, that is exactly what gives me hope. You know, it's just to see that we're all on the same page here. We're all on the side of Ukraine right now. And I think Eurovision is a beautiful event where we can show that unity and we can show that solidarity all together.
Ukraine, okay, let's go.
Stefania, mamo, mamo, Stefania.
The semi-finals start this Tuesday, the 10th of May, and will end with the final on Saturday, the 14th of May. Richard Cady, Euronews.
I, for one, can't wait for Saturday. You're up to date. I'll see you soon.